Then we got the radiation. And then they claim they went around and up through the outer band. Well, guess what? When you go up to the poles, it's even more concentrated there. So they're trying to say they escaped it by going around. That takes longer to do that, and you're in a higher density when you're approaching that to go up through. Like any of the shots they show, they're in the second band even longer than if they went straight out through it. And both are ridiculous to think that they could travel through that without the type of protection that you would need. Of course, the windows would have to be closed off and quite a bit of protection over them as well. That's not apparent. I mean, they can claim they protected the rest of it, but there are the windows.
Yeah, got the windows. And also, if you're launching from Florida on the east coast of America, you can't go on a polar orbit. It's not possible. You can't just turn left halfway across the Atlantic and go through the poles. It doesn't work that way.
No, they're using the rotation of the Earth to achieve orbit.
Yeah, they were being catapulted at 1,000 miles an hour, speed the Earth orbits or rotates at, and it would help them to do it. But they were going across Africa. That's nowhere near the poles.
Yes, and that's mentioned. They're going right over the eye there, right?
Yeah, the Rishat structure. And that's in Mauritania. Mauritania's in Africa. It's nowhere near the poles. You can go to the poles, but you launch from the west coast of America, from Vandenberg Air Force Base. That's how you do the polar orbits. That's how spy satellites go into polar orbits, so they can have the Earth rotate underneath them and they photograph whatever they want to. But if you're going to launch from Florida, you're going to go across to Africa. Come on, guys, the poles are nowhere near Africa. The equator is.
Well, once they get to space, everything changes. They can change direction. They can accelerate, decelerate, anything they want up there. They just have that magical formula that is capable of doing that. And they can do it all with just a couple little thrusters. They don't need to use a lot of fuel.
No, they don't. No. And of course, it's all fiction.
Yeah. Well, it's like Woody Woodpecker said, coming back from the moon, it's downhill all the way.
Yep.
It's a nice fantasy, and I understand the people that promote it. It's a nice thing to achieve. I don't disregard the science that's being put into it, everything else. Just because we can achieve it doesn't mean that you don't want to. And it plays on people's imaginations. That's what these people are working on, is the imaginations. And those imaginations built Disney. Tremendous input of cash going into there. Tremendous profits being made by triggering a person's imagination. And Musk is doing exactly the same thing. He's more than 20 years. So Apollo is just absolutely amazing that you're doing it, in 6 years? Or actually 5 years was the first man launch, right, in orbit. They had to create the buildings. Then they had to build the equipment within the buildings to build those spacecraft and the spacesuits and everything and test it and make it all work. And if they didn't have the right amount of thrust, they just told you they did. If the spacesuits didn't work, they said, they passed the test. And the best you could see on video is LeBlanc passing out at basically 70,000 feet. And if they had to pull that vacuum back in, they pulled it in within a few seconds, because otherwise the guy wouldn't be able to open the door to get in there. They equalized that pressure back up so rapidly, because even a few seconds more, he would have died. You're just going to get bubbles in your blood. It's just going to kill you just that quickly.
It's interesting, that's the only piece of film where LeBlanc goes backwards. The only piece of film I think you've ever found showing anybody in a proper vacuum environment. Not very high level of altitude. The effect it had on him, I think when he was debriefed afterwards, he said he first was aware of bubbles on his tongue, and that's the first sign of outgassing of his saliva, the first indication that there's a problem. Get back into pressure, guys, which is why when divers come up from deep dives, they have to depressurize over an extended period of time, because all the gases in the blood are compressed by the pressure. And as you come up, the pressure is released. If you come up too quickly, those gases will cause you serious injury. It's called the bends.
Sometimes it takes longer to bring the body back to temperature than they have on the dive.
Exactly, yeah. Which is why there are special compartments that divers can enter underwater. They can enter the decompression chamber and stay in that for as long as it takes to get their blood gas situation back to normal. These are people whose career depends on being alive, so they take it very seriously. If they didn't, they wouldn't have a job, or they wouldn't have a life, they'd be dead. So they take it very seriously, and they take a long time to decompress, because the human body can stand that level of pressure, but it's the effect it has on the body that has to be countered. It's a remarkable thing, the human body. You do have to observe its limitations. And one of the limitations are if you can dive considerably far down, and if you come up, you have to come up slowly. If you don't come up slowly, you're dead.
And that's the same anything in space. That's one thing you never hear anything about people that are so-called in space. They should be checking those pressures all the time. You should have actually a crew of people that are monitoring that. You need to have a flight crew. You need to have a maintenance crew. You need to have everything on board that thing. And you have to have something available for a daily flight. Something that if there's a problem to go up to assist. Because if the systems go down, like just because they got an escape pod or whatever sitting there, that could go down with it. Like I said, the fantasy's there, and it's because it develops so much money. The interest is there. It develops so much money to do that. And these people that think that we're having a grand future, and you realize that if you look at the NASA on the report server, most of the testing they're doing is on higher altitude commercial flight, 35 to 45,000 feet, and going supersonic. They're working with Boeing on that. They're developing those bypass engines that they're doing for fuel efficiency, everything else, because our airspace in commercial flight is so crowded. They want to have that extra altitude up there for commercial flights to fly in. And that's what they're focused on all the time. They're not focused on space flight. They're just renting that equipment out. That's what people need to understand is their focus isn't there. So for them to all of a sudden say, oh, hey, we're going back to the moon or we're going to Mars. I mean, I don't know who's going to sit in a diaper all the way to Mars.
Oh, there'll be some idiot who want to try it.
You realize that none of the Apollo had any kind, like first you need an airlock system. Second, you're going to need proper toilet facilities. Third, you're going to have proper pressure. Fourth, for an extended journey, you're going to have to create artificial gravity. You've got to have incredible radiation protection because you have no idea when the next CME is going to jump out and grab you because there's no way to escape it.
Yeah. Well, no, it's the same with this Japanese SLIM mission to the moon that launched on the 25th of December. I see one subscriber here has mentioned it, and that's the one where just before it lands, it ejects one probe, and then when it lands, it tips over, and then that little frog probe is launched to hop along the surface. How many probes do these people need up there is what I would like to know. I mean, all of this radiation detection problem was supposed to be solved 55 years ago. So why did they keep sending these probes? Well, we've seen what happened to Peregrine. Peregrine perished. But this probe here will be interesting to see what they find.
Yeah, I suspect what happened with Peregrine was they didn't take into account the vacuum levels. And some of the equipment just didn't work in the vacuum because they hadn't tested it in a vacuum. The level of vacuum they would expect to find in the space they were going to.
One other thing I wanted to bring out too is not just the Peregrine, but this SLIM mission. Now, between the two of these robotic missions, it seems to be, when you read different articles, it seems like the radiation is the biggest thing. Now, this is what gets me. They are going to need to get that lunar gateway installed, built, and up and running before they go anywhere. Why would they be canceling this Artemis 2 just over that Peregrine failing to land there? Number one, when they have all that radiation detection still on the moon, supposedly, that's transmitting to this day, supposedly. Number two, they're going to need that Lunar Gateway station. So even if they said they were still going to go, they couldn't because they don't have that station up there.
Maybe it just went into a lunar lake and sunk.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah. Or could, well, the hockey team. That's why. You have to have a Canadian as the commander because he's going to be the captain of the hockey team. There's enough water on there to make a frozen lake.
What happens if he gets a breakaway?
If he makes a breakaway, he'll make a breakaway all the way to Mars because it's downhill all the way.
I guess there'd be another NHL.
The NLH, the National
Yeah.
Lunar Hockey League.
Yeah. I wonder if they're going to have a movie costume designer making their jerseys.
Yeah, because they have to work in space.
Yeah, they have to have another $3.5 billion just for their jerseys.
That's a good business if you can get into it, isn't it? And especially unlimited funding from NASA, because they don't know what these things cost.
There's money in imagination. Disney proved that. Musk has proved it. Over 20 years, he's spent an awful lot of money. He's
Yeah.
blown up a hell of a lot of rockets. He's really good at that. But he's not selling a product. He's selling imagination, and he's being funded for it. If I had a business that didn't make a profit within the first couple of years, you would shut it down. Anybody would shut it down. He's been going over 20 years, and all he's ever had is expenses. And he just comes up with a new idea, and he gets funded for it.
Yeah. He's getting funded through NASA for all these things.
He's not getting funded. He's making billions of dollars in profit off that imagination. Well, there's a few other organizations that work on that. I mean, any religious organization has worked on that. It works really well. Musk is really good at it.
Well, he's had years of practice.
His one company, I mean, he manufacturing cars. I don't know if he makes a profit on it or not. Certainly isn't anywhere at the level that he's making money at. It's not coming in from that. His little high-speed rail, underground rail, okay, what he built about a mile of it. I don't know how many billions of dollars he got in funding for that, and he just kind of drops it and goes, well, that's not going to work.
I was thinking of the Hyperloop. And how many times did Thunderfoot bust that, Phil Mason? How many times did he say that that's exactly what would happen because it cannot function? It's impossible. You have the tiniest little vacuum leak. Now we're talking about over 70 miles, 35 to 70 miles. But here's the problem. As Phil says, you're going to have so many tankers behind you to pick up the water vapor because it's going to all have to go back into tanks in a closed loop. Because as soon as the water vapor evaporates, it's not a vacuum anymore, is it? And that's why the whole thing went to pot.
But the batteries would still burn quite nicely in a vacuum.
Yeah, and explosive decompression. Oh my God. Can you imagine going even 50 miles an hour in that and you had an explosive decompression? Never mind 750. We're talking catastrophic events.
Yeah,
wow.
And those lithium-ion batteries, they just burn away. They got their own oxygen. They'd even get hotter because the heat would have to just radiate away.
Yeah, those batteries, when they catch fire or when they have thermal runaway, they're extremely dangerous because of the fumes. Anybody anywhere near them who breathes in the fumes, they're going to kill them.
Didn't jolly old England have a bus catch on fire or two?
They did, yes, last week. It was a big double-decker bus, which we have in England, 2 layers, carry about 60 people. It was going down this road, quite near Wimbledon, where the tennis tournament is, in southwest London. Battery explodes. Bus catches fire. They can't put it out, so they have to let it burn. Fortunately, there was nobody on board, but that bus was going to collect school children.
Oh, boy.
Now, if that bus had been fully loaded with school kids and it had caught fire, do you think those school kids could have got off the bus in time?
The fumes would kill them.
Yeah, the fumes would kill them.
Only takes a couple of breaths. Even if they got out, they'd still die. The fumes are so toxic, they just literally dissolve your lungs.
Yeah, extremely toxic. It's unbelievable what these idiots are trying to impose on people.
Yeah, but look at the ones that they were going to use for commercial purposes. It's called something Flyer. I don't really remember the name of it, but again, this little personalized, computerized craft that will take you flying and, to your office and back, providing you have 25 minutes, because that's it. After that, you don't have any batteries and you fall out of the sky. But the problem is just what you're saying. How would you like those lithium-ion batteries to catch fire when you're 2,000 feet in the air and you don't? And by the way, parachute's not going to save you because it will go up along with you and the craft.
Yeah, it will.
You'd have to have the parachute on sitting at the door and get out before everything started to go. You'd have to have the parachute on and sitting right at the door, just pop the door and jump.
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to have electric aeroplanes, how many people are going to be willing to get on board an electric aeroplane?
Wouldn't catch me on one.
Exactly.
When I was looking at those two engines and comparing the Merlin to the Apollo engine, and then comparing the Apollo engine to the engines that they used in the V2 engines, and you look at the piping in there, and what I did was I put them in a bracket, and I was just showing the different pipe work, how they were stacked and came down. There's barely anything that's changed. As a matter of fact, the one on the F1 engine had the red around the bottom of it at first, and then the one that Musk has, the Merlin, it has the same red around it. It even has that.
Yeah.
Well, because he's copying it, isn't he?
Yeah.
The only difference is they're using different types of fuel, and then the Raptors are using a free flow design of the fuel.
But you still need a turbo pump to pump the fuel in fast enough to get the thrust.
Yeah, and you see, we did have comments underneath the one video because they're going, oh, well, it only had this much thrust or it only had this much thrust. Well, if you look it up on the Merlin engines, they're going anywhere between 220,000 pounds of thrust to 380, depending on the type of fuel they're using. And that's the same with the Raptor engine. They're
Right.
250 to 500. And then when you start reading it, oh, well, if you're putting methane in there, they use so much fuel that they can't get to even space.
Yeah, but then you look at this one. This little document says now it has 687,000 foot-pounds of thrust. So which is it?
Yeah, they're kicking these numbers around, but that's why when you see Musk rocket sitting on the launch pad for 7 seconds and doesn't move, it's because they've got it loaded full of fuel until it can take off. And those engines aren't going to get you anywhere because you can't carry the fuel when you're using the methane. And I mean, they admit that openly. We can't reach space.
And yet still, all of these ones, it just blows my mind that these guys still haven't mentioned anything about that bloody limb in the window, inside of that window. 2 videos now and nothing.
Nothing at all.
Not even from Chocolate Strawberry Truffle or whatever his name is there.
Yeah, we do have a dedicated American, and he makes it very clear that he's an American, and he's defending the American technology, and he's there every day, and he admits he's a troll. He's there to correct us because we don't know what we're talking about. And this guy's an absolute joke because he doesn't do research. He copies and pastes from Wikipedia or Chat GPT or whatever else he grabs a hold of and puts the information up there. He's a dedicated American, that's for sure.
Well, why doesn't he come and chat with us here live?
We offered and he has refused. Of course, Japan, in the news,
Yes.
launched to go to the moon. And I was thinking, because they actually landed upside down. This is what they claim. And I don't know how you can land upside down and know about it, because obviously that's where the antenna is, and the solar panels and all that stuff. So obviously it crashed on the moon. Yeah. Let's assume that they got there and it crashed. But I was thinking about Woody Woodpecker, in 1950. I mean, when you launch from America, you're on the opposite side of the Earth. It takes a lot of trouble to get there, but it's downhill all the way back. So if you're leaving from Japan, it's now downhill to the moon. They should have mounted the vehicle upside down so it would land on its feet when it got there. And then they mounted it the wrong way up. So when it got there, it landed upside down. That's what the whole problem was. They should have known that. They should have listened to Woody Woodpecker. He had it right in 1950.
Yeah, it's called slim pickings.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, just logic will tell you, if you're on the other side of the Earth, you're going to land upside down unless you put the vehicle in upside down to start with.
Now, why didn't they think of that?
Well, Woody Woodpecker would have explained it.
He would, yes, he explained it very well. It's downhill all the way.
Yeah, it's downhill to the moon all the way because you're on the other side of the Earth when you take off. So you mount the thing upside down when you take off, and then it'll land on its feet when you get there.
There you go, sorted.
Simple.
You know what's interesting about this, though, is that they don't show you anything. All they show you is CGI images of this lander all the way down to the surface.
I know. I watched it live, and I'm looking at CGI, and I'm going, well, where's the actual footage? How do they know that it landed upside down? Because they would have lost communication with it. I mean, you're going to smash the antenna right off of it. How do you know?
Well, I guess it's just like Apollo. You just point the dish at the ground, and that's how it works. You don't point it at the Earth, you point it at the ground, right? That's why it'll bounce off the ground and back to Earth. I guess that's what these guys are doing.
Just like the sunlight does, I guess. The radio signals just bounce right off, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Simple, really, when you think about it.
But yeah, this is all graphics. I mean, these graphics are going back to the 80s, like mid-80s that you'd see inside of an arcade.
Did you see the shot of it loaded on top of the rocket? It's right side up. That's why I looked at that, and that's why I said, well, they loaded it wrong. It should be the other way up.
But it's the same with all of these. They show the rocket taking off, and then as soon as it gets just near the atmosphere, it's CGI. You don't see anything else. That's it, all the way there. Where are all of these satellites that are supposed to be taking pictures? I mean, they have them orbiting the moon too, so they say, so they should be able to take some pictures of this when it goes by. But all I'm seeing is the TV camera on the craft itself, and it's just showing a picture of the crescent moon on the right-hand side. That's as far as they show you. After that, there's nothing.
Nothing at all, no.
Well, we've got guys here in the comments that have so much knowledge, they can correct these problems. Like, they claim they can correct them. These guys that are in our comments all the time, they know so much about it. There's one guy saying in the 1960s that people were using telescopes and they could see it, the vehicle come into orbit. They could see the burn as it comes into orbit.
Oh, Apollo.
Yeah, Apollo. That's underneath this. These guys know so much about it. The one guy copied and pasted a Wikipedia thing on all of the sites around the world that claimed that they saw it as it came into orbit and picked up the signal and everything else, right? I mean, we can't do it today.
No, you couldn't do it then either.
You couldn't do it then either, but these guys seem to know so much about it. We got one guy here, I mean, he's over 200 comments in the last video.
Really?
Okay, seriously, over 200. I stopped counting them. There's so many. But they just seem to have this much knowledge. I don't know why they're not working with Musk and Bezos and NASA. It's just unbelievable. And it's quite insane. And I don't know where they're getting the information. Like, if they're teaching in schools, it's such a shame.
Or they're reading Wikipedia, which repeats all this nonsense. There's no telescope, including the Hubble Space Telescope, that could see something as small as a rocket coming round the moon.
Even Bassett, he's out there, he did an entire thing on Hubble, and he said Hubble, the physical size of the lens would need to be 10 times the size to be able to pick up the lander on the lunar surface, and it would still only be 2 pixels. I don't know where they're getting the fantasy from. We were actually watching Brian Cox interviewing a 12-year-old kid or something. And he said, you will be the first generation that can imagine going to Mars. He didn't say going to Mars. He said, imagine going to Mars. That he was quite correct in.
I thought people had been imagining it for years.
They've been imagining it for years, but this will be just commonplace that they can imagine going to Mars with the technology. Well, we don't have any technology that can get us anywhere at the current time. One other comment that was made is the guy said, we don't need to worry about radiation in the belts because we can see starlight coming through there. So there really isn't anything there. There's no atmosphere on the Earth either because the starlight reaches the ground and the atmosphere isn't blocking it.
I was just checking the latest film you've just uploaded. 37 comments already. It's interesting, that comment about the P900 or whatever it was, the Nikon lens. You know, I mean, where do the people get these strange ideas from that a lens produced by a Japanese photographic company can image something on the moon as small as the lander? It just makes no sense. Don't they know about resolution and angles of view and pixel count, things like that? No, obviously not. It's nice they're commenting on the film because it shows that they're watching it.
What we were talking about is all the water that is now on the lunar surface, right, that they're claiming.
There's a lot of water on the lunar surface, and they'll find that it's all evaporated in a vacuum.
Well, it should have. Even if it was turned to ice, it would do so over time.
It would sublimate. Been there for millions of years. It would sublimate. It would just disappear. Same as snow does on Earth. You know, if you leave it there long enough, it disappears. And you can see it here on Earth in the same situation. It's called Devon Island in the Canadian Arctic. Just go and have a look at Devon Island. You'll see what Mars is like. That's where
Did you know that there's 42 dump sites on Devon Island?
Oh, that's right. We went looking, yes.
There's 42 dump sites on Devon Island. And that's why you keep seeing all that garbage in those shots.
Yeah.
Because those dump sites also have docks for the ships to pull in to dump their garbage. And that's the only place where you can actually get onto the island is on those docks. So if you're going to do some filming up there, you're going to be very close to a dump site.
So there's plenty of material there if you want to create certain environments.
Well, yeah, or they just leave the garbage laying around and it shows up in the shots of whatever they're trying to produce there with the rover running around.
Same as they did in Flagstaff with Cinder Lake.
And they used a dump site there.
Yeah. Should be very helpful, that. All that material with all those strange shapes that they could put shotcrete over them, claim that it was on the moon. Wonderful.
Well, we got some pretty good images of that garbage that's in there. I mean, there are pieces of equipment in there that are very large, and most of it either old military equipment or manufacturing equipment where they stripped out. If you realize that after the Second World War, all the plants that had been converted over for the war effort were converted back into whatever they were doing before.
Yep.
And they just threw that stuff out. They didn't recycle metals, even cars, in the early 60s. So they were just thrown into metal scrapyards and stuff like that. And the bigger pieces of equipment, the heavier machinery, of course, they couldn't even break it down. We got machines today that can chop a car up into bits in seconds. There's videos online how they pull a car apart with a robot. The robot rips the roof off and then plucks the seats out, rips the hood off, pulls the rat out, and it is putting it in different bins. Yanks the engine out, then flips it over, rips all the driveline off of it, and then picks the rest of the shell of the vehicle up and throws it in another pile. And then another car comes in and it starts it all over again. Like it rips the tires off, throws them in a bin, separates all the stuff. Like the interior is ripped out just by this robot, right? It just grabs the stuff.
I had to laugh at this one here. And I don't know why he even bothered to ask this question, right? You have, of course, surprised chocolate strawberry, right? He says, do you have any specific schedule for releasing videos? And do you have any certain specific days for debates? And I go, yeah, we release a video each week. We record our program each and every Monday morning at 10 PST in the morning. Why not hop on and discuss this with us? We don't bite. And his reply is, sorry, I'm camera shy. Well, why did you ask us then? What was the point?
Well, because he needs to set his schedule because he's here 20 hours a day.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So he doesn't need to set his schedule. He's here every day until the next video comes out.
Yeah, they're probably recognized by people who work with him. And they would say, what are you doing on that channel? You work for NASA. Oh, I'm just trying to correct their mistakes. No, you're not. You don't know what you're talking about half the time. It's a bit sad, really. It really is.